Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.
Good evening. With the kids back in school and the county fair circuit over for another year, Idaho's political campaign is moving into the post-Labor Day stretch. This is the traditional time of the political season when candidates argue with each other and with the press about whether and how they'll be debating each other. It's the time when a major mistake, a slip of the tongue, can turn a campaign upside down. Tonight, as we'll be doing periodically over the next several weeks, we sample the political observations of some of Idaho's political reporters on just how the campaigns are going at this point. With us tonight is Rod Grammer, the political editor of the Idaho Statesman newspaper in Boise, Mark Shanafelt, the bureau chief of United Press International in Boise, and Gene McNeil, the executive producer of Idaho Reports, who coordinates our election and debate coverage, among other things. Welcome to you all. Rod, let me start with you. Most of the attention, the political attention, is focusing at the moment, continues to focus on the George Hansen-Richard Stallings race. Give me just a thumbnail analysis of how it looks to you at this point.
Well, Mark, about 2 months ago even, it looked pretty dismal for George Hansen. Stallings was very confident, the Democrats were very confident. I'd say in the last month or so, Hansen has been kind of consolidating his support, and that's the opinion of the Republicans. The Democrats don't agree with that. But I think the reason for that is the financial reporting problems that Geraldine Ferraro has had on the national level. George has effectively applied that to his case, I think convincing a lot of people, especially in eastern Idaho, that he's the victim of selective prosecution. They wonder why she's not being prosecuted.
Anybody else have any thoughts on how that stands now? Any difference or agreement with Rod's assessment? Mark?
Well, I think Rod's probably got a good line on it. I think Stallings at this point is probably a little taken aback by the Ferraro episode. And his campaign and him himself, they might be in the process of reassessing the last stretches of the campaign. He's spent a lot of time basically laying low, not really attacking Hansen a lot, and I think they might be wondering if they hadn't ought to go out a little harder in the end stretches.
Yeah, I think that's what I'd add. I think, first of all, I certainly agree with that. I've been surprised at the number of political observers from both parties who, as Rod said 2 months ago, were ready to write George Hansen off, who have canceled their bets essentially and are now saying that it's probably very, very close at this point. The thing I would add, I think, is what Mark was pointing out there. Stallings has a tough thing he has to do because he has to keep the voters' attention focused on George Hansen's financial troubles, but at the same time he can't seem so attacking that it backfires on him. And I just don't think the Stallings campaign has found the way to ride that very, very difficult line.
You agree with that, Rod?
Yes, I do, Mark. Matter of fact, I understand the Stallings people are supposed to be conducting a poll this week to kind of get an idea of how they should approach the final weeks of the campaign. And there's a lot of debate in the Democratic circles about whether he should come on hard charging or whether he should kind of walk the fence or whether back off. And I think they hope this poll will give them an indication of what they should do.
Excuse me, Gene, go ahead. You mentioned, Rod, the Ferraro finances. And I think most people would agree who've been watching this that Congressman Hansen has been successful in linking his troubles to her troubles. Is, in your mind or in your reporting mind, does that link exist?
Well, to a certain degree, they're not exactly the same. Ferraro took the exemption under the law, where George just didn't report it under the law. And to that degree, they're different. But they're making a case, and maybe a case can be made, that why didn't she report her finances? And if she didn't report her finances, why isn't the Justice Department going after her right now like they went after George a year and a half ago? And it's a legitimate question, I think.
The difference, one of the differences, I think, too, that a couple of newspaper editorials have pointed out, but which, for instance, the Stallings campaign doesn't appear to have picked up particularly, is that while they both may be legally wrong or they both may be legally right, we won't know until the whole process goes through, the transactions that George was basically convicted of not reporting raised some questions about influence peddling. whereas Ferraro's finances that were disclosed don't appear to raise any of those kinds of questions. But that has not yet become, I don't think, a perceptible issue in the campaign.
Well, and there's another line that Stallings could use, which he hasn't used very effectively so far, and that is that, so what if Ferraro broke the law? That doesn't make her any more right than it makes George. You know, two wrongs don't make a right. And so far, I haven't heard Stallings talking about that in the press or anywhere else.
Gene, the debate between, if it happens, between Hansen and Stallings could be a pivotal moment in the campaign. What do we know tonight about whether that debate will happen now?
It's as confusing as ever, and I think probably Mark talked to the Hansen campaign most recently, but I talked with the League of Women Voters person who's coordinating the debates just today. It appears that Stallings' commitment, after he did some, if you remember, some kind of turns around on whether he was going to participate, it now appears that his commitment is firm. A letter has been sent to George Hansen. Some very contradictory things have been said in phone conversations between Hansen's campaign people and the League people, and in other conversations and in the things George has said. So the League and the Press Club sent Hansen a letter and asked him to give them a definite answer by a week from Friday, which he says he will do. The point of difference, I think, is that no one argues that if Congress were in session, Hansen couldn't really be expected to be at a debate in Idaho, but it's very unlikely it will be. The term that Hansen is using is congressional business, which can mean almost anything, and could mean that on the day of the debate, he could suddenly be called to Washington for some sort of meeting.
What do you know about this as of today, Mark?
Well, the same thing Gene knows. It's really confusing. We don't know what the candidates are going to do. I think it's a symptom of the importance the candidates place on these debates and what impact they might have on their chances in the election. They might still, Hansen still might be checking out the flow of the results of the Ferraro situation and other things that are going on in the campaign, and he might be trying to wait as long as he can to commit or not commit.
Rod, I remember back in 1980 during the Frank Church-Steve Sims race for the Senate, the two debates that occurred during that campaign were viewed as having a good deal to do with the outcome of that debate. Are we in that sort of a situation potentially with this debate?
I think very much so, Mark. I think George Hansen's playing this real smart. He's waiting to the very last minute to decide whether it's in his interest or not to debate. My opinion, nothing against the press club, but I think Stallings is really making a mistake politically debating. He has nothing to gain by it. I think in a debate situation with Hansen, he could get chewed up pretty badly, and because he's not as smooth as Hansen, he's not as experienced as Hansen. If I were advising him, I would have said, let's not do it, or let's waffle on it and see how we sit come the 1st of October.
Gene, I think maybe Rod's assessment is borne out by the fact that Stallings apparently had some trouble with part of the format of the debate. The last segment of the debate, as it's structured, will allow the candidates to question each other, and reading between the lines, maybe he's concerned about that.
I think, yeah, it's very, very interesting because, again, reading a little bit between the lines in both cases, it appears that what concerned Stallings was that section where the candidates question each other. It appears that what Hansen would prefer is an entire debate in that format without the reporters asking the questions. So it's sort of one wants one and one wants the other, and obviously they think the different formats are to their advantages.
Let me just quickly get a handicap from each of you. Is the race a toss-up now, or is the conventional wisdom had it, and our poll had it for a while, that Stallings was definitely ahead? Rod?
Well, I think you have to call it a toss-up, Mark, anytime Hansen's involved, and especially now.
Mark?
I think the Ferraro debate has not really been cleared up in the minds of the voters. I think a lot of them really don't know what to think about whether Hansen's right about Ferraro or whether he isn't. And I think a lot of voters might fall back merely on the assumption that, you know, there might be a little wrong in both cases or right in both cases. So I think Stallings, at least, has not separated that issue to his advantage.
Gene?
Well, if we're talking about today rather than November 6th, I'd still give Stallings the edge. I don't think he's lost that tremendous lead quite yet, although certainly it's gotten a lot closer, and it could easily turn into a toss-up or go the other way by early November.
Let me go to a different race, the race in the 1st Congressional District between Congressman Larry Craig and Bill Heller. for a long time, Rod, it looked like there might not even be a race in that district. And now Bill Heller, whether he's coming on with enough, is coming on, isn't he?
Oh, definitely. Cecil Andrus calls Heller the political find of the year, and he definitely is for the Democrats. He seems to have been born with a political spoon in his mouth. He seems to have the right instincts for when to attack, how to attack. And I think he's caught Larry Craig off guard the last few weeks.
He has spent, Mark, a lot of time attacking Congressman Craig's voting record on specific things, tying the congressman's vote against a bill reauthorizing the Superfund, which is a big fund to clean up toxic waste disposal, saying it's sort of ironic that Craig's voting against that in Washington when he's leading the charge to do something about the EnviroSafe toxic waste site in Waukee County.
Well, he's done that a couple of times on a couple of issues, and I suspect he might do so in the future. I think Rod's right. Craig might have been caught off guard a little bit. I think Craig has reacted swiftly on a lot of Heller's charges, and I think he realizes that he does have somewhat of a fight on his hands, maybe not as much of a fight on his hands as incumbent Hansen does, but I think he realizes he can't sit back and just walk into Congress again without responding to Heller.
Any problems with the debates here, Gene?
Well, yeah, one did develop just this past weekend. Apparently, the woman, Sally Gibson of the League, got a letter from Craig indicating that although he made the commitment back in June, I believe, and although the format was spelled out at that time perfectly well, the letter was somewhat vague, but it said that he had agreed to a debate, not to a format that might lead to loss of temper and sensational media stories. It sounds as if, and I'm only speculating here, but it sounds as if he may be having second thoughts about the head-to-head with Bill Heller. So I don't know where that one stands. The press club and the League wrote a letter back to the Craig campaign explaining the format and pointing out that that was the format that Craig had in fact agreed to. So we'll have to see what happens. He may be hedging a little bit now, too.
You said Cecil Andrus calls Bill Heller the political find of the year. I guess a lot of people who watch politics closely think of this race as one where Bill Heller is getting his feet wet, getting some name identification this time, showing that he can run a credible campaign, with the idea being that 2 years from now he'll really go after something.
That's right. I haven't talked to one major Democrat who has told me that they think Heller will beat Craig this year. The words they use, good possibility, or he's a good candidate, but 86 really looks like the year for him.
Okay. Ironically, the low-key campaign of all of them seems to be the campaign for the U.S. Senate, which features obviously a popular incumbent, Jim McClure. Why is that, Rod?
Well, Mark, neither the Democratic Party really doesn't have a candidate who's very organized. He has hardly any money. And it's almost embarrassing to McClure how much money he has compared to how much money Bush has. And they just aren't
What is it? It's several $100,000 to about $10,000.
Oh, yeah. Last time I saw he had a little over $5,000. I don't know how much he has now, but it's the Democrats just haven't fielded a very credible candidate. Not that Pete Bush wouldn't be a good candidate, perhaps with more experience, more money, and all that.
Gene, Bill Heller is getting attention because he is really going after Larry Craig's voting record. Pete Bush seems to be trying to do the same thing, but without getting the same kind of attention.
I'm not sure quite why that is. I think that's absolutely true. You read a newspaper story, for example, on Heller's latest attacks on Craig and Bush's latest attacks on McClure, and there's nothing more aggressive about Heller. Bush is being just as aggressive. He's accusing him of being basically in the pocket of out-of-state interests, the oil and gas interests. He accused him of voting for the bailout of Continental Bank because he'd gotten a contribution from the American Banking Association. He calls him a radical conservative. I'm not sure. He doesn't have that, I think, that silver spoon that Rod referred to earlier, or at least in this campaign, he doesn't. And I think, frankly, we, meaning the news media, just wrote him off a long time ago and aren't taking his campaign particularly seriously. And when you see the amount of money he has, it's tough to take it seriously.
Yeah. Mark?
Yeah, I think that's what is happening with Bush is I think a lot of people have wrote him off a long time ago simply because McClure is so entrenched and he doesn't seem to have any trouble. It's turned into a bizarre campaign in a lot of ways. Bush got a lot of publicity a couple weeks ago when he flipped his plane over. And there was controversy about, what he was doing in the field with the plane. and he hasn't really.
Might just give a little background there. He thought he was landing at an airstrip that had since been abandoned, as I understand it, in the Shoshone area, and wound up trying to take the plane off and piling it into a ditch bank and hurting himself fairly badly. Required some stitches.
The point I was trying to make is Bush doesn't seem to be really seeking a lot of big media publicity. And another offshoot of the effect of that is the Libertarian candidate in the race is getting almost as much as publicity as Bush has.
One thing that might explain that, and it really just occurred to me now, and it might be all wet, but it seems as if Heller has the understanding of the news media and how to use it. I would suspect that there's going to be some attack on a specific of Craig's voting record about every week, just about in time to have that story build up and Craig respond, and then we'll all get ready for the next one. Whereas Pete Bush tends to lay out all his charges at once, basically. He doesn't have that kind of timing that seems to keep the stories generating.
Jim Fisher, who covers politics for the Lewiston Tribune, in fact, wrote a story recently about Heller's attacks on Craig. And as you suggest, Gene, Heller said, "I'll have another attack next week." So perhaps it is a well-orchestrated effort there. Let me talk here just a little bit with you all about a couple of other political things that are going on at the moment, and one of them being the Speaker's race, the race for the speakership of the Idaho House. Rod, you wrote recently about that race between, as it's shaping up, between Tom Stivers, who is the Speaker now, and Steve Antone from Rupert, who would like to be the Speaker. Quite a race.
Yeah, it's probably one of the best races in the state, Mark, and in terms of importance, probably the second or first most important single race. They both claim that they have enough votes to win, which leads me to believe one of them is wrong. And a lot of independent members of the House say that both of them are inflating, either intentionally or unintentionally, their number of firm votes. So I think that race is very hotly contested. Even though people on both sides will tell you that Stivers has it or Antone has it.
Rod, 2 years ago when Steve Antone made the same try, and I guess from all I heard came within a couple of votes, the general consensus seemed to be that had he worked harder, had he, for instance, been in Coeur d'Alene at a meeting of the Republican legislators, that he could have done it. Is he working harder this time?
He's working real hard, and the people behind him who've put their neck out on the line are making sure that he works hard. I understand the understanding was that they wouldn't get behind him if he didn't make that commitment to work as hard or harder than Stivers, and so as I understand it, he is.
Rod, you made the point in your column recently that in a lot of ways this election is as important to the political shape of things in Idaho as any of these others we've been talking about. Because it really represents perhaps a shift in philosophy in the leadership of the legislature, from Tom Stivers, who's a very conservative legislator, to Steve Antone, who we all call a moderate Republican. Mm-hmm. It's that important.
It's very important. If you look at the Stallings-Hansen race, it's an important race, but Hansen is just one of several hundred votes in the House, and he's in the minority at that. Whereas the Speaker of the House, he controls, who gets appointed to which committees, who are the chairman of those committees. He sets the tone, the philosophy of the House, and that race is very, very important to the state. And as you pointed out, Mark, the last three speakers, including Stivers, have been very much to the right, very conservative. And if Antone's elected, it would mark a dramatic turn in philosophy.
Mark, the Speaker has an issue in waste in too many state employees and too much time wasted and too much money spent on them, I guess, and he's trying to make it stick.
Well, he's been talking about that for years, and this year, though, he's added a few decibels to it. He brings it up more often. He highlights it in his news conferences he calls, and he's got under the skin of some state officials, too, now, I think, more so than he ever has before, and they're reacting quite strongly to it.
Including Marty Peterson, the governor's budget director.
Right. I think Stivers might perceive that a lot of people, voters, want something done about, waste in government. And I think he probably thinks that he's following a line that might help him in drawing votes for other candidates of his philosophy who are also running for the legislature, who in turn might be inclined to vote for him in the Speaker's election, when the membership picks the Speaker this fall. That's another
So is this a campaign within a campaign in a way, a campaign to influence these folks who are the selected group of Idaho legislators who will vote for the next Speaker of the House?
It could be. I think it might just be a reflection of an added variability this year in the Speaker's race. Is the reapportionment has expanded, the membership will have more new members, and I think the candidates in the Speaker's race right now are having a little more trouble than usual in finding out who is going to be on their side because they don't know really who's going to be elected.
Well, it's a natural issue, too, because if you look at the situation, the revenue situation, what with the ballot initiative to remove the sales tax from food, the money that's needed to implement the rest of the Education Reform Act, and so forth, the legislature really is only going to have two choices. One is to make some fairly dramatic move to cut state government. I mean, you can't do it by going through and trying to cut small programs here and there because their constituencies rise up and you don't get it done. So it has to be a fairly dramatic.
And it just doesn't amount to that much money.
It doesn't amount to that much money either. So unless you make some dramatic move, then you're going to have to raise taxes of some sort. Raise taxes, close loopholes, whatever it might be. And I think Stivers is laying the groundwork for the direction he wants to go on that.
Well, can Tom Stivers survive?
It isn't quite as great a dictum as never bet against George Hansen. But I'm beginning to think that you probably shouldn't bet against Tom Stivers on anything. Mark?
I wouldn't want to pick it.
That close?
I agree. I think Stivers is going to be real difficult to unseat.
Well, here's one vote for Tom Stivers. Finally, in the time that remains, Gene, I want you and the rest of these two fellows to handicap for me three important legislative races that are being watched widely around the state. One of them in eastern Idaho in the big Senate Floterial district between Rusty Barlow, a former member of the legislature, a Republican, and Dwight Horsch, a current member of the House, who's trying to move to the Senate.
I've talked to about, probably altogether 6 or 8 members of both parties kind of observe these sorts of things. And on that one, the majority are giving it to Horsch, including all but one of the Republicans. There's a variety of opinion as to why that is. But generally, that one seems to be fairly, people seem to be fairly solid on giving that one to Horsch.
How about another race between John Peavy, an incumbent state senator, and Wes Trounson, who's also an incumbent? That's one of the places where two incumbents have been thrown together because of reapportionment.
That's the one that people are calling the toss-up. And what several people said is a lot of it's going to depend on whether the Snake River water rights, the so-called Swan Falls issue, is diffused some way between now and late October by some sort of agreement among the parties who would take the heat off John Peavy.
Any disagreement there, anybody? We should mention that Peavy's on one side of the Swan Falls issue and Trounson's on the other. And the other race that again throws two incumbents together is Claire Weatherall and Walt Yarborough in a new district that includes Elmore and Owyhee counties. That's
an interesting one because it really does give each of them some territory that not only they've never run in before, but is really quite different from the territory they're used to. The consensus, although it wasn't as lopsided as the consensus giving it to Horsch, was that Weatherall would probably take it for a couple of reasons. A couple of people cited the population of Elmore County, although I would add sort of that you look at the voting turnout, and partly because of the Air Force Base, Elmore County doesn't turn out the percentage of votes that Owyhee County does. So Owyhee County is more important than you might think it would be. Most people cited the upfront publicity she's gotten, Claire Weatherall has gotten on the EnviroSafe issue, and how she's sort of taken that away from Yarborough, whose issue it really ought to be given where he lives.
Races, all of them, that we will continue to watch throughout the rest of the fall. Gene, Mark Shanafelt, thank you. Rod Grammer, we appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you. That's our time for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. I'm Mark Johnson. Good night.
This program is produced by the Idaho Educational Public Broadcasting System, which is solely responsible for its content.
Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.